Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for July 22nd, 2019. We'll begin with the special order calendar. Continued hearing items. Item number 1, 751 60 BZ, 105 New Dorp Lane, Staten Island.
They requested an adjournment.
Item number 2, 8174 BZ, 9727 57th Avenue, Queens.
Okay, 2 alternatives were provided to enclose the entire recycling and storage area in the building, in a new little building. If I understand it correctly, therefore, no trash will be stored outside this building. The difference between the 2 proposals appears to be materials only. My interest is that the structure be well-built and well-maintained to show respect to the community. The rendering of the metal enclosure is slightly better, but if concrete block, it should be finished block. That's a type of a block that's already got a finished treatment, or stuccoed as opposed to just a raw concrete block that isn't appropriate in this community. Those were my comments. Any others?
No.
Yes, sir.
Sorry?
You go ahead. Vice Chair, you have a
No,
comment?
I just said I concur with.
Yeah, I do have one. The foundation depth for the proposed structure doesn't satisfy the New York City Building Code for permanent structures. We asked, last hearing, we asked them to install a permanent structure.
Yeah,
And the foundation depth is kind of a slab on grade system.
okay.
The depth of the footing doesn't satisfy the 3.5 or 4 feet deep for the frost protection. So it's up to them if they want to modify the depth. We're not pushing them to do that. But if they are not modifying the depths, they need to call it clearly permanent structure. So when
Yeah,
it goes to
okay.
when it goes to the DOB, they ask them to do so.
Okay.
So notation of permanent structure. on the
Permanent
plan.
structure.
Yes, notate a
Right.
permanent structure or modify the foundation
Right.
depths. Or
Okay.
both.
And, you know, it's possible that the person who did the drawing, frankly, is, you know, if I did the drawing not being an engineer who knows about foundations, I wouldn't have done it correctly, so it's possible the
possible,
architect
yeah,
drew
that's
it, not knowing what the structural rules, laws are. Okay. So just to add that note, permanent structure on the drawing, and whichever, and you know, they should do it today, they should make the change. But whichever one they select, unless somebody has a preference about whether it's metal or concrete block, if they select concrete block, it needs to be finished block or stuccoed.
Item number 3, 33279 BZ, 4320 Little Neck Parkway, Queens.
They requested an adjournment.
Item number 4, 8599 BZ, 1106 Metcalf Avenue, the Bronx.
They also requested an adjournment, and it sounds from the request letter that significant progress is being made to bring the site into compliance. So they detailed in the letter how far they've gotten.
New cases, item number 5, 14301 BZ, 348 East 9th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, there are no notice requirements for extensions of time. The last report of status of work to obtain a CO is from April. I'd like to know what the current status is. This job actually hasn't yet received a permit, although the application was filed in 2016. The issue was about asbestos. Asbestos closeout and insurance are the only open items showing, and I don't know why it's taking that long. Is this an asbestos? Normally, you fill out a form and then you proceed to work on the site according to whatever the instructions on the form are. So I don't really understand unless it's turning out to be a big asbestos project. But they're not. They need a permit in order to actually mitigate the asbestos. They should provide also an affidavit from the owner stating that there is no boarding of animals at the site, which was a condition of the grant, both the prior grant and the one before.
Is that the only condition you want confirmed?
Yeah, the others aren't
Okay.
specific.
Item number 6, 19397 BZ, 2729 Great Jones Street, Manhattan. Received a letter from Fire Department recently.
Yeah. We have a proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Notice of hearing was also posted in the mailroom. Community Board recommends approval. We have Fire Department letter of no objection stating it issued violations for failure to obtain an operating permit. They should clarify the total area of the PCE. It isn't stated on the statement of facts. It may be 11,941 square feet. That's what I got from the drawings, but I don't really know. They also revised their hours of operation from what was approved to 9:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Sunday.
Fifteen of their massage licenses have expired.
So if they're still providing massage, provided
They are.
Right.
renewed,
yes.
yeah.
It's a spa, so that's what they do.
May I go on? I'm sorry. Item number 7, 189-12BZ, 98 Montague Street, Brooklyn.
There are no notice requirements for extension of time to complete construction. The status on the work remaining to be completed is from April, and the statement of facts is from 2017, where a dismissal warning notice was sent this past March, so they just didn't follow through. So I'd like an update on construction. There was very little remaining to be done in April, and the job has a TCO for most of the building. So I'm not really understanding why this has to come here. Wouldn't that be substantial construction?
Yeah, I did question it,
Yeah.
but I think they were just erring on the side of caution.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
Move on. Appeals calendar, new cases, item number 8, 2019-13A, and 2019-14BZY, 11-31 Ryerson Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. We have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends approval with 6 abstentions. Department of Buildings provided a letter stating that the permit issued on December 11th, 2018 to convert an existing warehouse to an 11-story hotel was lawfully issued. The zoning text change occurred on December 20th, 2018. So I need help a little bit with that in terms of DOB's reference to 10 days before the zoning text change as the permit that was issued, but I'll go on a little bit more. So this is a common law vested rights case, and in the alternative, a zoning 11-331, quote, minor development, or an 11-332 case for other construction. I don't know whether the enlargement constitutes a major enlargement as defined in 1131. The latter assumes foundations to be completed by the effective date of the zoning work to be an as-of-right vesting. So a major enlargement is normally considered to be one where they had to drop columns all the way down into the base cellar, and therefore there are foundations which would vest. There's also a very large enlargement, over 50,000 square feet, would constitute a major enlargement, and it's not clear whether that assumes foundations, because the only way you can vest is with foundations, but what if it was lightweight construction and you don't need foundations, so that's not clear. The thing that's called other construction had to have been completed by the time of the text change to vest as of right. So we look here to see if substantial construction and expenditures were made. As another threshold matter, the application under 11-31 was filed within 30 days of the permit's lapse, that otherwise they can't get in the front door with statutory vesting. The sequence of events and work in place that were originally directed at developing an office building were only redirected towards developing a hotel under permit 10 to 20 days prior to the zoning text change. So I need to understand better how the courts have looked at such redirection, and the fact that DOB issues that letter that seems to indicate there's a permit only 10 days before. Work in place seems like it would work just as well for an office building, except perhaps for the 18% completion on the interior partitions for the hotel. And when do you start to count that work? Only once the post-approval amendment is approved?
That's what I believe.
I don't know.
I believe it's pursuant to the valid permit authorizing the work to be done. And that would be the PAA permit for the hotel, because the prior permit was for the office building. So in order to me, to vest the prior work that was done previous to the PAA, they would have to provide a DOB-approved plans that show that what was contemplated in the office building is exactly what is contemplated in the hotel, and there's no way you could do that because the hotel, of course, is laid out differently than the office building.
No, but actually, all the work that was done up until that point, give or take some, I don't know when they started the interior stud work, but all the work that was done was windows, facade, interior demolition. Those things must be done no matter what building you're
Right,
doing.
but that was pursuant to the prior
Yes.
permit, the office building permit. So
Right.
once the new permit comes out, that office building permit goes away as if it doesn't exist, once the PAA is approved and the permit is issued. And so they actually said to us that there were numerous occasions where the BSA has allowed a vesting when the permits have been related to the permit
Oh, yeah.
as an excuse for why we should adopt that previous work as being attributed towards the hotel. But I don't remember that occurring. I remember one instance where we allowed a related permit, and it was a foundation permit, and we allowed them to vest the foundation permit because the foundation permit actually had attached to it buildings for the entire, plans for the entire structure. And it wasn't detailed structural plans, but it was conceptual structural plans that actually matched the structural plans that they wanted to vest. That's the only case that I can recall. I would love them to provide other cases that have been approved to show that we've done this when it's been a completely different use permit
Right.
with changes.
But so the way that I see it is that the concept of related permits is you get your OT permit, so your architecture permit for the use, basically. That's your NB or your alteration type 1. But you're also getting permits for plumbing, you get permits for foundation, you get permits for electrical, all those different things, right? And those are the related permits, because you can't look at it as just a shell that's carpentry. That's not how a building is built. So my understanding of related permits is all the different trades that need permits that go into building the thing,
I'm going to
right?
second that. That's what
What?
I believe, that's what my understanding is as well.
True, but those permits have to have at least conceptualized what you're vesting, which is the issue we had with that foundation permit, which is why we allowed them to vest the foundation permit for more than just the foundation. But it's because it actually conceptualized plans for the building that matched up with the DOB-approved plans.
Right.
So then it was like, okay, you know, you were intending on building this, what, I don't even remember what building it was, and it's clear from the foundation plans that you were going to build what ultimately was built.
Right.
But this
yeah.
is a case where that's not so. You were working on the facade and the windows pursuant to plans that authorized an office building. So you could either vest that office building, or once you put the PAA in place, that is now a hotel with different floor layouts and everything, unless they can provide proof to us that the plans were identical, and that would be a conversation, then you can't vest the hotel with work that's done for an office building.
Oh, but, you know, and I don't have a conclusion here, but I'm just like thinking this through. If you take out, all of the other work was done under alteration type 2s and 3s, so that's work that's not a change in occupancy, right? So it actually doesn't matter whether it's for an office building or anything. First, they gut the building, right? So it's a demo permit to gut the building and to deliver essentially a plain box. And then there's the window demolition and the installation of windows that, because of the nature of the building, the windows are only going to be what the windows are going to be because it's an existing warehouse building, right? So it's the installation of windows, still delivering a box, an empty box. and then whatever the other trades were, right? So they didn't get anywhere. The amount of plumbing that was done was minuscule. I think they probably just brought the main service in, and that's it, because the cost is nothing, right, or very little. So if you start off with a plain box, and however you file it, because we often see applications, for instance, for schools, where it's not an allowable use in the district, and they get an application for an office building or a trade school or something that's allowed in the manufacturing district, and they proceed with all the base construction work, but they can't get the permit until, for example, we grant a 7319. So then they convert the application to the school, right? And that's a continuity of the permitting process. So that's, my question is, like, why can't you take alteration type 2 box fix-ups, and then as long as the use is pursued to as long as the use is pursued, and I think one of the things that I wanted to say was, they have some amount of money, 18% in the stud work, right? So in laying down the tracks and metal studs, right? And they showed photographs which shows a significant amount of metal studs in place, even though it's only 18% of the total for framing, right? So you could say, what did you do from the date of your permit for the hotel to the zoning change that was hotel specific, but you can't have possibly installed those studs unless you demolish the building, you put in the windows, you like all that sort of stuff. You had to start with a clean box.
Right, I understand what your point is, but the whole vesting process is to preserve your investment stake in a development. And so there's no need to preserve your investment stake in an office building that no longer is going to exist. That permit is no longer valid. However, when you did all of that work, it was for an office building. It wasn't for a hotel. So you were not trying to preserve that investment in a hotel at the time that you did all the work. So it's only after you file the hotel permit that you want to preserve your investment stake in a hotel. So to me, from the pulling the permits for a hotel forward is what's counted towards vesting for the hotel.
For me, I think I'm somewhere in between both those positions. I think there's a question of fact as to whether or not that work originally was done for the goal of the hotel. If the, now,
It was not,
they
though.
admitted
if it's
that.
not,
They admitted
if it's
it
not,
was not.
then I don't know if we
For
could
an office
say,
building.
if it's not, then I don't think we
So,
can say that.
But I think I go back to what the chair said. I mean, the zoning, at the time when the construction started, the zoning
Allowed
had
it.
allowed hotel, office, both uses were permitted. So regardless of whether the text change happened or not, the construction could have started with the understanding that it could be all the floors of hotels, it could be partial hotel, partial office,
That would be the
anyway.
question of fact.
And so all the work that was being done was done to ensure that the space would have to meet the requirements of an office space / hotel, because the requirements are the same, which is you have to remove the asbestos, you have to provide the proper kind of, I think the improvements would have to be the same. So to me, the fact that the zoning text change is more important to know as to the timeline and the sequencing of it than the vesting part of the fact that the use that they're allowed as a hotel and the work happened could have been for either. It's acceptable to me. It's like the fact that you could have either a hotel or an office space and the work started, and that we can count that towards hotel even though it did not get the permit for a hotel. To me, it seems.
Can I say something? Because to me, the problem with that is if you follow that language along, then anytime you have an alteration of an existing building, it will automatically vest because the existing building is in place, right?
Yes.
And the existing building serves many different uses in bulk. So if we followed your logic, then every alteration or enlargement will automatically vest literally upon
For any change.
hammering your first nail because you've already got in existence prior to your permit a structure.
But so, okay, because the reality is that kind of stuff happens all the time, right? The reality is there's a build-out for, we see this sometimes, there's a build-out for a residential building, which works great as a community facility with sleeping accommodations, right? Let's just say it's a neighborhood that no longer allows that kind of community facility, right, as of tomorrow, right? The switch-out is nothing. The switch-out is hammering a new sign on the front door because the layout is identical, right? So in terms of how vesting works for what would be other construction, the requirement for other construction is that it be 100% in place at the time of the
Right.
text change.
Because you're protecting your investment, that's the key. You have
there's
to
no
protect your
prejudice.
investment in that project
No.
that you started. And that's why for an other, which has so little additional structure, that whole structure has to be in place because it's the new project that you're vesting. If it were, as the vice chair had stated, then there would be no need to have a vesting for other structure to apply to any kind of enlargement because the bulk of the building is there in place. So you should automatically vest following that logic, and that's not the case because the zoning resolution actually provides for a pathway to vest an enlargement. And the pathway is protect that investment pursuant to the valid permit that authorizes that investment. And so then now we take that and we apply that here. We can only vest the work that was pursuant to the permit that authorized a hotel use.
So I just want to say, though, when you look up, so I don't know if DOB is participating in this.
No,
So
typically they
I
don't.
think it would be helpful if we understood DOB's position on what a permit is, because when you go to their website to biz, and you look at the permit that was the alteration type 1 permit, it says issued September 2017, filing date September 2017, proposed job start 2017, expires 9/2018. And it says, alteration type 1, foundation earthwork, conversion of existing warehouse to hotel, including reallocation of existing floor area and vertical extension. So if you relied on the way their website handles it, which may just be an affectation or whatever, it seems like the second you file your PAA, it's a look back to the initial permit. Because and particularly in this case, there was no demolition needed to undo the last and then move forward to this next. It was a continuity of construction. So this idea that there is this right to have a post-approval amendment where you can add floors under a PAA, you can, you can add floors under a PAA, let's just do that hypothetical, right? Zoning changes a week from Tuesday, and it reduces the amount of floor area. You file a PAA, and you draw the addition, and you file it, right? You haven't done any work on the addition, but on the additional structure, let's say it's new construction, you haven't done any work on the additional 2 floors, but you've done all the base building work, but you didn't vest because, for whatever reason, you didn't vest. For whatever reason, you didn't vest. What would happen to those 2 floors? You're saying you don't vest those 2 floors because they didn't start construction? Because this is new construction, and you have a foundation in the ground, and you filed the PAA prior to, so let's just say it's a statutory vesting. You filed the PAA a week before the zoning text change. Shouldn't that entitle you to vest those upper 2 floors that you just added today?
No, because
Why
it's
not?
then a minor
Why?
enlargement.
No, it's new construction. I'm doing the version of new construction.
Oh, so it's
Proposing
a
that
grant, so you're saying that you filed a plan for a 10-story building, let's say, and you built out all 10 stories, and then you changed it to a 12-story building?
No, you didn't even build out all 10. You got up to the 5th floor, and you see there's a zoning text change in a week, you file a PAA, and now it's a PAA for a 12-story building so that you get all that FAR that you're about to lose.
Right, but you still have to prove that you've done a significant amount of investment for that 12-story building, which you probably will meet in that case. But you're now, you're vesting a 12-story building at the point of the zoning change.
But
aren't you?
No, so under the as of right, statutory vesting, the only rule is foundations in the ground,
Right.
right? Foundations are in the ground, I'm up to the 5th floor.
Right, so then you're vesting, but what you're vesting is the 12-story building. It's the latest permit that was on file.
Yes.
Yes.
So, but I just changed my application a week before the zoning change.
Right, but the foundation was probably exactly the same for the 10-story as the 12-story. If it isn't, and you didn't finish your foundation, let's say to build 12 stories, you needed to add something to your foundation wall, and you didn't do that, then your foundations would not be complete for a 12-story building vesting as of the
Right.
date of the text
But
change.
then they come here.
And then, but they would, it would be hard for them to make the BZY because you would have had to complete your excavation as well. So you would have had to prove that you completed the excavation for the new 12-story foundation and then made significant progress on the foundation for the 12-story building. And if it was the same as the 10-story building, except for that extra wall or whatever you'd have to put in, you most likely would meet that vesting, providing your permit is valid and your 100% excavation has taken place.
Yes, I believe the reason the legislator mentioned the foundation in the western story is because the foundation is related to the entire building. The foundation usually in the construction where the foundation is probably 25, it could be up to 40% sometimes of the cost-wise for the entire structure. So if you're constructing a foundation for, let's say, 12-story building, and you put foundation for 12-story building, you already put upfront 40% or 25% or 30% of the cost of the entire structure. If the zoning changed later to, let's say, 6-story building, and the city or the authorities ask you to just build 6-story, you would go to the court and say, no, I can't do that, because I already invested 40% of the cost for the entire building in the foundation, and it is done.
Right, right.
So I'm vested, and this is what's in the vesting for the minor development thing. But for this specific case, I believe that, yes, that the PEA approved probably like 20 days before the zoning, the effective date.
Right.
And even in the statement of fact, they mentioned that they started with an office building, and then all of a sudden they decided to explore some other scenario, and then prepare plans. But during the plan preparation and filing for the PEA, the owner directed the site people, the construction people, to just forget about the office, start working on a hotel. So for me, I would look at this in two different ways. If, like Commissioner Ali Brown said, if the plans for the office are exactly identical to the plans for the hotel,
They're not. No, you can't.
I'm fine with that. If not, I would look at the work done during this period until the PEA is approved as an illegal work. If I'm a DOB inspector and I went to the site and they have, let's say, 10 by 10 footing for the office building without grade supported footing, and let's say for the hotel, because it's probably larger building, taller building, they, instead of 10 by 10, they needed 15 by 15 and it's pile support. If I go to the site and I see, oh, look at column line A with column line 20. They have a 10 by 10 grade supported footing, but what is existing is 15 by 15 pile supported footing. Oh, what is this? Oh, we're building a hotel. This is, where are the plans? Look at the plans. No, these are not the plans that were approved. Violation.
Okay, so if you're building not pursuant to approved plans, that's a different thing. But there's no rule that says you can't overbuild your building in anticipation of adding more floors, right? So if the drawings say they were going to be 12 by 12 and they build 15 by 15, that's different because it's not pursuant to the plans. You have to build pursuant to the plan.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So, but you can overbuild it because in 10 years, I'm going to add 5 more stories, and so that's in anticipation of 5 more office floors.
But you have to
whatever.
put this in the plans during 5 years.
Right.
And probably
No,
mention it.
I know that,
But
but
what I want to add is, here the foundation is not the question, it's the walls, it's the
Yes,
interior.
right.
And all the changes that they have made in of the wall and the interior, if the inspector were to go there, it would have
Same.
been completely legal because they
Yes.
have all the required permits to make all the changes. May that be for an office use or an hotel use. The changes that was proposed and done was consistent, would have been the same that would have been required for a hotel. So I think we shouldn't be just relying, we do need to look at the work that was done regardless of whether the work was done for the hotel or for an office and count
To
that
separate-
towards.
Can I say
Separate-
that you'll be on
just-
shaky
Yeah,
legal
I
ground if
think
you do
that's
that? Because
problematic.
the whole idea of vesting is to
Problematic.
vest the investment pursuant to approved building plans.
And
so
permits,
it's to protect your investment. That's why you come here to vest, is that, oh, I spent so much money on a hotel and now I can't have a hotel anymore.
And in that vein, it's to protect that harm, that person who's now being prejudiced by this change. It's to show that they have made an investment, and now they're losing that investment. And so common law vesting is basically an attempt to preserve a person or an entity from harm created by a change. So they have to, and again, it's common law vesting, it's not, it's statutory, they have to show that prejudice, that harm. And I'm waiting for tomorrow to, maybe they're going to make an argument about that that's a little more detailed than what I've seen in the papers. But, and I'm sure as other commissioners have been trying to grab at, well, is this the harm here? But they need to show some sort of prejudice, some sort of harm.
I think that in terms of the appraisal material also, you know, they had a classic appraisal done if it were a hotel, if it were an office building, and apparently it's more profitable if it were a hotel. But that's not the same thing as the investment-backed expectation of when they purchased the building to convert it to an office building. And they got the prices and everything to build an office building. That's not the same thing as realizing a lot of times you build something and you're like, rats, I should have done, you know, the market shifted, rats, I should have done a condo.
And maybe we're
Right.
in here under a different
But-
application.
Yeah.
But the serious loss standard is not a highest and best use
Right.
analysis. And that's another drawback to this A application, is that they're applying just a highest and best use analysis. We, you know, in this location, a hotel is more valuable than an office building. We should be allowed to keep it or we will lose, but that's not what the standard is. It's that there is a serious loss from having invested in a hotel development up to this point. And so then you have to look at everything that went towards making this hotel pursuant to the valid permits and what would have to be undone to pursue an as-of-right office building, if anything would have to be undone and then redone, and then what would my loss of income be on top of that?
Okay.
So it's a more involved analysis than just saying, oh, we looked at this, and if we, you know, look at the value of a hotel and look at the value of an office building, it's clear a hotel makes more money for us. That's not the standard.
So the first part of this is a statutory vesting case before us, right? The second part is of common law vesting, where the courts have held that you don't have to spend much money towards establishing your vesting under the common law. Like there's a case where they spent $169,000 and the court said that was an investment-backed expectation that will be undone at the loss of $169,000. So here, I forget, they actually do show you that line item in the requisition for payment of the 18% stud work, which would definitely have to be ripped out because the rooms are like this, right? And I don't know if any of that plumbing, I doubt it, if any of the plumbing work is related to the hotel, because I really do think it's just bringing the water in from the street, or digging underground just to get a line in there. But that's the question, is like, under the common law, what would be a reasonable threshold to expect when we have case law that doesn't expect very much? You know what I mean?
Right, but common law vesting is clear that it's a delicate balancing act as well. So it's not, you don't just vest when you spend a certain dollar amount. It allows for flexibility in the analysis, balancing what your investment was, what you're losing at the time of the vesting if you're forced to build as of right. It's a balancing act of all of that. So yes, you could vest with just maybe excavating, and we've had a vesting case about a decade ago of a home that literally had just done their excavation. That's what they did. However, we allowed them to vest. Why? Because the change in zoning would have made it so that they could not build anything on that lot. It made the lot
that's different.
unbuildable. So they were able to vest with a minimal investment of having done the excavation without even doing, and we couldn't even determine whether or not they had sunk any footings yet. However, the balancing, because they would not be allowed to build anything, was in their favor. So it's a delicate balancing act that swings in different directions. It's a pretty broad statute, but still they have to make the finding.
Right.
So
Well, it
another-
isn't exactly a finding under vesting, it's common law direction, right? So
Right.
there are
There are three prongs:
the
substantial,
prongs, right?
work done, substantial expenditures, and
Expenditures.
serious loss. And so
Yeah.
they have to prove that rather than make a finding.
And the
Prove
case-
that. And I think another shortcoming of this application is there's no discussion about the implications of the text amendment. We have no way of knowing why having to go get a special permit from city planning is an onerous issue for them. They don't discuss this at all. They don't discuss whether they could meet the findings of that special permit even. There's no discussion there at all. So that's another way in which this project is lacking at this point in time.
Is that a requirement?
Well,
under
in
the-
order to talk about your loss, you have to talk about what you're losing.
You have
What
to
are you losing? Are you losing
Well,
1 month's worth of time?
No,
only, or
it's a ULURP, so they're losing a year and a half.
Right, so,
or more.
but they don't discuss it, so
Okay.
you have to make your point as best you can,
Right,
and literally
okay.
throw in the kitchen sink and lead us by the hand to your conclusion that the loss would be substantial and you could not recover from it,
Yeah,
basically.
to that point, like, again, with the prejudice, you have to show how this has negatively affected, harmed you and your original plans. And the other thing, and I'm not sure if it was mentioned, is that I think it has been, because it has to be, the building, the work has to be done under a legal permit, and that's to be done in good faith. And I think that's one of the things that you'll find in the case law. You'll find like a good faith of work basis, not to embrace that common law vesting as opposed to a statutory vesting.
Well, but in this case, we don't have any indication that they didn't just do what development does, right? I mean, if we just look at the timeline, they said, according to them, I'm going by what they said, they decided to look at building a hotel in October of 2017. That's that's a year before a year and change before the change in zoning. Now, they may have been aware that there was discussion at city planning about the special permit, certainly were, but when they started preparing plans a year before they actually pull a permit, that's how long it takes, right? So that's not like a quick switch. It takes a very long time to prepare a set of drawings for something as elaborate as a hotel, so.
So
But
we want to make,
interestingly, though, the common law vesting allows them to include those soft
Soft
costs
costs.
because it's
Right.
pursuant to that
Yes.
hotel permit. So you're allowed to have a look back for things that are specifically going towards the hotel permit.
Right. Okay. Okay. Good, thank you.
I believe it would be helpful if they get us like
Say it
some...
louder.
It would be helpful if they get us some details on what was exactly done after the issuance, after the approval, I'm sorry, of the PEA until the effective date came in. So these
Yeah,
20 days...
that's 20 days, right.
Yes, we want to know what exactly was like constructed during these 20 days.
And I imagine
Right.
it'd be helpful to have the costs as well.
Right, yes.
That's what he
They have to
means.
go through the application and
Separate
focus in on that time period from pulling the hotel the
Right.
hotel PAA permit to the change of zoning.
Right, right. Okay.
Zoning, may I move on? Zoning calendar decision items, 2018-48 BC, 5205 Highland Boulevard, Staten Island.
As requested, the fencing adjacent to the park was replaced with solid vinyl fencing to better conceal from the park the activities at the site. That's all we asked them to do.
Move on.
Yeah.
Item number 10, 2018-149 BZ, 230-48 146th Avenue, Queens. We received revised plans.
And they made the corrections.
Item number 11, 2018-180 BZ, 1441G, South Avenue, Staten Island.
The applicant's letter provided a letter responding to our discussion about the through parking lot sidewalk, which we forwarded to DOT. Fire department sent a letter saying that they are concerned. I think they're thinking there must be a curb. I didn't really understand what they were thinking, but anyway, fire department was opposed to the idea of a sidewalk. I want to note that DOT's email to us recommended that the parking garage exit right.
I just want to add a few things. I think based on the discussions we had last week, I personally did a little bit of my own research just to get an idea of can a bioswale be integrated with the sidewalk. And as I did a preliminary look through the regulations of what's in the DEP website, Grow NYC, and also superimposing on that the city planning regulations with regards to surface parking design requirements, I do not see it being feasible, given that the bioswales require a slope condition and planting and additional planting that would be required by, as part of the surface parking requirement of city planning zoning regulations. So, and I think the information that the applicant has provided shows that there is no curbside drop-off, pickup, or standing along South Avenue, so which would further eliminate even the possibility of any vehicle stopping, dropping children off, and therefore the need for a sidewalk through the parking becomes even moot. So those are additional information that kind of helps me determine that I think DOT's recommendation in this case is not applicable. Sorry.
So I'm going back to, he was just checking the mic. I'm going back to the initial purpose of this application, which was for rooftop parking, and the difference between the as-of-right here, which would be a 3-story covered parking garage, and the proposal here, which is for rooftop parking on the 3rd level, is the absence of walls and ceiling on the 3rd level. And so any of the findings are due to the impact of the absence of walls and ceilings on that 3rd level. And so I don't believe that there is an impact to the absence of walls and ceilings on that 3rd level, and so I am absolutely okay with this project.
Okay, I believe, in my opinion, we got 2 sets of directions here. The first one, put sidewalk in the parking lot. The second one, sidewalk would impact our operation, do not put it. What I'm saying is, I'm an engineer, I'm not an expert in school safety and these kind of stuff. But if this was an engineering topic and somebody, my engineering knowledge and background and expertise directed me to do X, and whatever agency in the city directed me to do Y, I would just put this aside and do whatever my expertise and my knowledge tell me. But for this specific case, I believe we need to make sure that the drop-off on South Ave issue is covered if something happened in a week or a year or a decade to a kid, every single person in the city would point to us and say, BSA approved this. So I'm tending to ask if this is possible. Again, I'm not the expert in this. If this is possible to do the following. Number one, get an assurance from the applicant that no drop off whatsoever is gonna happen on South Ave. And number two, if it's possible to put a sign in the parking indicating that parents are not allowed to drop off kids here. If they do so, it's at their own risk. If these two things are done, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I was a bit concerned with the fire department's statement that they were, that the sidewalk would be something they were against. I do appreciate Commissioner Shetta's position that if they can have some sort of, something in their operation manual that would ensure that no drop-offs happen on that avenue, on South Avenue, that I'd be satisfied as well.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what is the procedure for registering kids at this school, but when I registered my kids at the school, I went to the school and I grabbed some forms, filled them, signed them. If the school can provide to us a certain form that says during the registration procedure, day 0, not even day 1, we're gonna have the parents sign a form saying no drop off on South Ave, sign please, and keep it in their records. If something happened to your kid, it's your own fault. It's not the BSA, it's not the city, it's not the FDNY. That would be like very satisfactory.
The school isn't an applicant though, unfortunately. The property owner is the applicant, so all we can do is ask the property owner to put that sign up or
Yeah,
require the school.
if a sign is there, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I don't think though, to be honest with you, even if the applicant said that they are willing to have that kind of a disclaimer be a requirement of admission to their school, that disclaimer is necessarily going to hold weight should something happen. For instance, when I go to an amusement park and I sign that disclaimer that says, should I lose a limb on this ride, I can't sue. My lawyer friend tells me, sign it, who cares? That means nothing in a court of law. If
Right.
you lose your limb, we're gonna sue the heck out of them.
No, it's
No,
just to put a
that's-
sign up. I don't think we're gonna get into what the
Right,
school
that's-
does.
And even
because
what
the
I'm
school-
asking, what
The
I'm asking.
school is not an applicant here, so we can't have a conversation. They were an applicant at the last hearing, but we can't have a
Even if they
conversation.
were an applicant, what I'm asking for is not to ask somebody that you're gonna have like a danger present on the parking lot, and I'm asking you not to sue in case of something happened to you. No, I'm not asking for that. What I'm asking for, if you put yourself in danger, you take the risk. It's your fault.
Yeah, but
It's not ours.
that's
Yes,
called,
I got
that's
it. I
called
totally got it.
America, and everybody sues and all
there's-
Right.
that stuff.
And
So
we're
we
in the battle of
explain.
liability, and we're in the battle of liability. If something happens with the sidewalk there, then it's our fault because the fire department said it shouldn't be there.
And there are signs on South Avenue which says no parking, no standing.
And
But
then you
again,
put no
to-
student drop-off.
So,
That, I think,
To
as much
Commissioner
as we
Brown's,
can ask.
right, and to Commissioner Brown's position, we are on this one limited case here and not the other matter.
Okay.
And you can sue anyone for anything.
Sir. Move on. Continued hearing items, item number 12, 4311BZ, 1926 East 21st Street, Brooklyn.
No cover letter was provided to explain how the submission responds to our comments. This makes review more difficult and doesn't conform to our administrative notice. I didn't find a cover letter.
Oh, she did submit.
If she did, it was after the fact. The June hearing was adjourned. Our last hearing was in April, and it looks like the submission is still missing some requested info. We were provided with revised DOB approved drawings. which indicate reviewed for zoning and egress on various dates as late as January 9th, 2019. Biz shows the post-approval amendment approved in January 2019 and noted, quote, "as-built." So apparently that coordinates with the drawings that we have because the timing on the Biz site and the stamp 2019 on the drawings. So those are as-built. The plans show side yard of 9'4" and 3'9", a rear yard of 30 feet and a front yard of 10'5", and that it is built 31'8" above an elevated base plane, which is 20.8 feet, which is approximately 6'7" above grade, so it's a tall building, but a 24-foot 10-inch rear yard continues to be proposed to the attic level without support provided. This is the third time we've asked for support for why the second floor and above extend to 2410. The attic has low structural headroom, so there's no reason for it not to comply with the 30-foot yard requirement. The attic plans and sections refer to much of the attic level as, quote, "a deduction area." I don't know what that is. Some has structural headroom greater than 5 feet, so how could it all be a deduction area? And the requested FAR, if they're right about how you measure the attic, is slightly less than 1, which is what we directed them to do.
I think the reason I had the same concern with regards to the area that has been indicated as a deduction area in the attic, given that the attic roof line is the same, the proposed in the rear is the same as the one in the front. And if much of that can be counted to as floor area in the front, why can't the same be replicated in the rear? That was my question at the last hearing, and I do not think it has been answered here either. Granted, the amount that we're dealing with, it's a rather small percentage, but I do think we do want the clarity on it. And I think the reason they're considering that to be a as a deduction area is because they've indicated the attic area to have a 4'11" ceiling height, and this is due to the structural beam.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why in this particular section of the extension, the structural beams are at 4'11", whereas the rest of it is not. So I think this is a more of a purposeful
Yes.
placement of the structural beam. And if they want to pursue with that, then we should have a note saying that will not be a habitable space, no living,
Never.
that kind of note.
We actually talked about this at the last hearing at length, and we said, when you deduct, DOB doesn't let you artificially drop the ceiling down. This used to be a trick that was played with mezzanines and things like that, where it didn't exist on the inspection, and the next thing you know, there it is, and you move your bed in, and it becomes your bedroom, right? So I have on my screen left over from the last hearing, which is the section through the roof where they drop artificially a beam that isn't necessary, and they drop it to 4'11", and it's the same conversation, which is why it's frustrating, because the applicant did not respond to the questions. There was no cover letter going systematically through saying this is the response to these various things, and I don't know why. So it just takes up time.
But in their cover letter, they did state that they were willing to cap the attic square footage at 643.
Right, but they cap it.
Addressing the issue of whether or not this is like some kind of a way to get around and then increasing the floor area later.
Right.
So it will at least go with the plans that it's capped at 643 square feet.
But it shows on the drawings, the 643, then you look at the section and you see a hammer knocks out those 4'11" completely useless beams, and now you've got a bedroom in there. So it's actually not what this is intended to do. So, and the instruction was to either drop the ceiling down, to drop the level of the height down over there, because it's not an occupiable space. And before, they had more than one FAR, and this is their way of regaining it, so.
Yeah, I
Okay.
believe once you remove the beam, it's not an attic anymore, it's a floor.
Yes.
It's that the height is not for the living. And I'm not sure if, I believe we asked for the architect to be present,
Yes,
and I would like to get an answer for why this beam is needed
it's not.
on section B, the beam shown on section BB on drawing A-012.00, page 12 of 13. Why it's needed all the way to the right at the deduction area, while it's not needed all the way to the left on the other side. My understanding is that it is the same structural system. If you structurally need the beam at this side, you should need it on the other side.
Right.
If you successfully designed this roof to stand without that beam on the left, then remove the beam from the right, and then the dashed area or the hatched area wouldn't be a deduction, because the height is probably more.
And by the way, we see so many of these houses and so many of these attics identical to this. They never have a beam in that location. So, I mean, that's the whole point about designing a pitched roof, right? I'm not an engineer, but this much I learned from architecture school.
Maybe they put it, but it falls down.
Yeah. Anyway, okay.
Did we ever get a rear yard study?
No, they never made any submission on justifying how they can have the shallow rear yard at the upper floors. I looked in every folder and found nothing. And we've asked for it since the beginning, and they haven't given it to us, and I don't know why.
And I believe, just to be fair, I believe they did make some changes to the structural system from the previous submission. So it's not, they ignored it totally, but I believe it was like a truss, vertical truss or something like that. They used to have like that horizontal
They
beam
had
and
some
then
columns.
some diagonal beams, and then they removed these
No.
diagonal beams and they just left the horizontal member in place.
No, my drawing of section CC that's from the last hearing shows columns and beams. At columns that go to the 4'11" and then beams. And then the usual rafter that you see further up where you've got an 8-foot clearance, or in this case, 7-foot head height, right at the center. But anyway, we don't need to get into this in
I
detail.
think in all probability, they're relying on having made the findings the first time around, when they first brought this application right before the fire. And then the fire, because it's an old application that would have been built a long time ago, if not for the fire that destroyed the walls, that made it no longer an enlargement, which they had to address.
Maybe, but it's a whole new building, and the applicant's representative regularly appears here and knows the drill, right? So, okay.
Item number, may I go on? Item number 13, 2017-217, BZ. Sorry. Excuse me. 4855 Highland Boulevard, Staten Island.
Okay. Sorry, continuing. I have a lot of notes. The applicant obtained a ZRD1 to confirm that the cellar will not be converted to a basement, hence floor area with the proposed modifications. They did that with a letter a ZRD1 from the Borough Commissioner, and explained about the base plane and the elevation of the base plane. Hence, what's critical about that is the proposed enlargement will not exceed the maximum 10,000 zoning square feet permitted by the special permit. That's what we were waiting for.
Next, oh, okay. Item number 14, 2017-273 BZ, 975 East 24th Street, Brooklyn.
The rear yard at the second floor was increased to 25 feet as directed. The front slope at the roof line was reduced only slightly with the break, so the roof kind of sloped up and then was horizontal and then slopes up. with the break dropping from 18 feet at the second, from the second floor to the break to 17 feet, so only 1 foot. This time, the ceiling height in the master bedroom went from 9 feet with an 8-foot crawl space to 12 feet with a 4-foot crawl space. So, and since the roof plans aren't dimensioned, I can't tell if the slope dropped down as instructed, but basically with this architect who, I listened to the video again, the architect was just refusing basically to make changes. So the building heights are inconsistent on the drawings and must be 35 feet maximum to the highest point. So the drawings have to be scoured and the word and the letter or whatever, number 35 throughout in terms of height.
I just want the applicant to clarify, it seems that the proposed floor area has increased slightly, and given that the revised plan that has been submitted, it reduces the habitable space on the second and attic floor, so I would like to know where the increase is coming from.
Is that it? Item number 15, 2017-298 BZ, 14 White Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we had open environmentals, we now have WRP sign-off.
Right.
And E designation and a revised EAS, so that seems like it completes it. And required notes were added to the plans with respect to E designation, noise and air quality, and automated parking system to be reviewed by fire department.
So I don't get the plan yet, which has the E number on it?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, I
We
did get
received it on
Yeah.
Friday.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
And it got loaded, for some reason, we received it again today. I don't know.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
They submitted the financial report to support the 5.29 FAR project, and that is fine. And they also made a statement that if they were to reduce the construction costs by the $2 million of hard costs that were questioned by Commissioner Shetta, then their return would rise to 5.4% annually, which is still within the range of minimal. So this is fine.
Item number 18, 2018-816? Oh, sorry, 16. 2018-8BZ, 1820 Cropsey Avenue, Brooklyn.
Sorry, just a second. Okay, additional materials were provided to establish continuity of use, including water bills, I think we saw the water bills before, and some type of rent indicator or sales journal, which I didn't really understand. It had a lot of other entries. I actually didn't know what that was. So I don't know if that establishes really the continuity, in part because I don't know what those things are. And then they provided photos showing no parking on sidewalk signs that were installed. They did provide those photos. And, but in terms of the water permit, the water bills, they clearly indicate that the landlord receives the water bills, which is what's supposed to happen, and that a copy of those bills are sent to the tenant so that the tenant is protected in case the landlord doesn't pay. And the bills consistently refer to Petro as the tenant, all the way up until very recently when it shifts over. So I'm not sure, we often talk about utility bills as being the thing that helps to establish continuity. Arguably, a Con Ed bill is better because when you don't pay the bill, they turn off the lights, right? As opposed to a water bill, you're not aware, well.
They put a lien on your property.
I don't know if they actually turn off the water if you don't pay a water bill.
They put a lien on your property.
They impose a lien, but they don't turn off the water, I don't think.
I was satisfied with the submission, and it might have to do with, I've lived very close to this establishment, and I've seen it since I grew up in this neighborhood. I've seen the establishment being used. And when you take all the evidence put together, along with the lease and these water bills, I think that they passed their burden for me.
I think the water bills actually indicate usage. Now, there are times when we
Yeah, they
get
do.
water bills and they indicate such minimal usage, you kind of wonder about the activity on the site, but these water bills are for a few $100s a pop.
Right.
And so they do indicate that there is usage, and that's what we're looking for, the continuous use. So I'm satisfied that
Okay.
it closes the gap.
Okay. Okay.
Item number 17, 2018-96BZ, 145 Ludlow Street, Manhattan.
Photos were provided to show a sound limiter was installed and mats kind of put down instead of installed. I'm kind of concerned about how these mats are going to work, if they're just down to test the success of the approach, or because they're just sort of just put on the ground like little throw rugs, and there's no sort of assurance that they'll get lifted up when they clean and never go back, or they'll be down in the right place for weightlifting. I know they're working with the residents on this, but it seems to me that whatever's done should be a permanent installation and not just kind of haphazard mat locations that in the photograph are neatly placed under the weights, but that's not necessarily where they'll stay if it's not really installed. Anyway, anybody else?
We haven't received any additional comments from the residents.
No, they may come, I don't know. No.
June 11th was the last
Yeah,
date that we have with a noise source of weight drops.
right.
Sure, please. I'm sorry. Can we go back to number 16? I have a comment that I didn't mention.
Oh.
Sorry about that.
Cat.
Yeah, maybe after this one?
Yeah.
That's okay.
So we finished on this one?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to return back to,
No, we're gonna return at the end of the,
I'm sorry?
we're gonna return right now? Okay. Oh, sorry, I misunderstood.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're returning back to item number 16, 2018-8BZ, 1820 Cropsey Avenue, Brooklyn. Is that the one,
Yes, it is.
Commissioner?
Yes,
Are you able to
I-
make a comment on that?
Yes, last hearing, we asked for a letter indicating that the wall, the perimeter wall is stable after the treatment done. I haven't seen that letter in the submission.
Wait a minute. I thought we did. We have an engineer's letter.
Yeah, it was
We do.
provided.
From my last hearing, you said, need a statement from the engineer that the repair complies with the building code to ensure safety of the building. My notes say we have an engineer's letter.
Right, I have a similar note saying engineering letter provided, and it was considered okay.
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 Item number 18, 2018-104BZ, 1234 to 1238 East 22nd Street, Brooklyn.
I believe they requested an adjournment.
Item number 19, 2018-140BZ, 100-03 North Conduit, Queens. Not Conduit Avenue, Queens.
Yes. DOT provided a conditional approval of the curb cuts. Their conditions need to be incorporated into our resolution. They're very lengthy. They should also be indicated on the plans, and I don't see that actually most of them are. There is a requirement for high-strength concrete for the sidewalks and curb. I'd like to understand one of the DOT requirements. How can the establishment manage the limitation on the arrival of tractor trailers and fuel trucks to only the 40-foot Conduit Avenue curb cut, or their departure only by the northerly 30-foot cut on to Cohansey? I don't understand, because the cars are not going to be limited, so how do you advise, especially the arrival, how do you advise the trucks that they can only come in this way unless they're regulars? I don't really understand that as a restriction. Also missing on the drawings are pavement markings as required by DOT, minimum distance for the DOT required sign locations, minimum distances between the display and sidewalk appurtenances, a location of the no standing anytime signs to be installed with coordination with DOT. Those are all in DOT's very detailed comment letter, but they should show up on the drawing.
Done? Item number 20, 2018-143BZ, 20 West 14th Street, Manhattan, received a request to adjourn.
Because they're working with the neighbors.
Item number 21, 2018-156BZ, 80-97 Cypress Avenue, Queens.
We received about 36 letters of opposition from immediate neighbors citing concerns about neighborhood context. A letter from the applicant to neighbors describes a shuttle bus service that will pick up and deliver to public transit and to the public parking lot, both located a mile from the site. We need an operational program on that shuttle bus with frequency of pickup and drop-offs, which will be a condition of approval, and I'd like to see that also in a restrictive deck. Some changes were made to the site plan, the first floor plan and elevations. The buffer area was increased to 20 feet along the west property line, except for one section where there's a sort of extension of the building, which is only 17 feet away, or the building is only 17 feet away from the property line. The buffer area is for the planting, that's 20 feet, but then the building itself sets back a total of 33 feet from the property line. The interminable ramps were removed, and the building entrance properly dropped to grade directly off the street. The number of parking spaces was reduced to 13 and was accompanied by a demand study based on a project in the Bronx that is near public transit. To compensate for the disconnect, the drive rate that applied to the Bronx site was doubled for the subject site. The traffic consultant should substantiate upon what the 50% number was based. Because 50% sounds like a lot, but I don't know how you decide. The building was brought down slightly in height, but there is a mysterious increase in the floor-to-floor height of the first floor. Reducing that back to 10'8" will reduce overall building height by 1 foot. Also, the elevations show parapet walls. I think there might have been a resubmission which eliminated the parapet walls. The parapet walls increase the apparent height of the building, so using railings reduces that apparent height. And the elevations actually show railings set back from the street wall, so the sections and the elevations have to coordinate. Base plane calculations are shown and indicate the new first floor is 2 feet lower than the base plane. The prior plans showed the first floor at 2 feet above the base plane, which so 124.4 on the datum versus 120.4. That's a 4-foot difference. So there's something incorrect in how the actual height of the building measured from the first floor is being shown. Measurements should be both in floor-to-floor heights totaled and in elevation based on NAVD 88, which is the standard. If the first floor in the prior set was at 124.4 as shown, and the new first floor is at elevation 120.5, that's a reduction in height of 4 feet. And if you compensate with that 11'8" increase, that's a reduction in 3 feet. So it's a noticeable height reduction. The zoning calculations show non-compliance with a required side yard setback. So I'd just like to understand how that, why it's non-compliant with the side yard setback. The Cypress elevation doesn't match the site plan. It shows fencing across the entire entry while there's no fencing on the site plan. I think these drawings might have been amended, but I'm not sure. So anyway, the site plan has to show the fencing, and then the landscaping has to The landscaping, which is shown, is largely for the purpose of shielding the neighbors from the building. It's not just to provide pretty planting for the tenants, and is wide enough, and specifically wide enough for significantly large trees and buffer planting. So they have to provide a landscaping plan showing the treatment of the buffer zone. So it should be it should be tall trees like you see in the neighborhood as standard. You're actually seeing very fluffy big trees in the neighborhood, and then also lower shrubs that shield, like as if fencing would do, shield it like a dense buffer zone. And they need a landscaping plan, and also to be very clear about the fencing, which should be metal picket consistent with neighborhood character, residential neighborhood. The neighborhood character study struggles to compare this building to a community facility. It isn't. It is a residential building. However, as stated by the CEO of Well Life, among the occupants will be seniors receiving supportive services. So if I compare the building instead to an affordable independent residence for seniors, known as AIRS, which this program most resembles, the bulk regs in an R5 district allow 1.95 FAR, and where certain conditions are met, building height can increase to 45 feet. That's section 23-631J. I don't know if the conditions that are in that section would be met in this case. It's possible that they do, I just don't know. So if that were the model, then the ask would be 0.48 FAR more than allowable for senior housing, and 2 foot 9 inches taller than the allowable in height. But as a standard residential building, it's a 1.18 FAR increase and a 10-foot height increase. We have also learned that in spite of the city being willing to do so in the past, the demapping action that nearly completed a decade ago is no longer available unless the applicant acquires the bed of 59th Street or does some aggressive lobbying to resurrect the past arrangement, which the applicant seems unwilling to do. So a builder's pavement plan will be required, and 59th Street will have to be paved to 50% plus 5 feet, even if unnecessary. I'm guessing the neighbors will not be happy with this because it would actually encourage traffic from Cypress when there's a lot of traffic and people don't want to wait to take that right turn and wrap around to 59th Street, bringing traffic down a small street, on a small street, because it's only half the width of a roadway, right? So I would ask that the applicant, out of respect for their neighbors and the community, make efforts to persuade DOT and perhaps Park to allow, instead of the 50% plus 5 feet paving, to allow the community or the applicant or the neighbor, because the neighbor is a cemetery who's expressed concern about that DMAP street, to plant that area instead of opening it halfway to a useless, too narrow street. And one thing that I was thinking is you could sort of see if DOT would accept a kind of a halfway concept where street trees would normally be required on this 59th Street, if that's the standard, right? So instead of building a sidewalk, build street trees where the sidewalk would have been, and install street trees where the sidewalk would have been at very close intervals, whatever the minimum allowable is between the trees, and that way you get some vegetation, nice trees that frankly hide the height of this building. Our direction is to find that this project will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood, and also to allow only the minimum variance necessary to grant relief. In the case of not-for-profits who don't have to prove financial hardship, we rely on programmatic needs analyses to determine what the minimum variance is, and on standards and often reviews provided by other agencies to help us analyze these questions. In this case, HPD is the agency that might have helped us understand better whether the number of units and building scale and design meet their program restrictions for funding and design. Unfortunately, however, that agency has declined to provide us anything in writing about this project, so the minimum variance has to be guided by neighborhood character. The neighborhood character study had to look at a mile radius to make its argument when our standard is 1,000 feet. There is now no front yard proposed along 59th Street, although there was one in the earlier iteration. If that street is actually to be open for traffic, then the large building is too close to it. The architect explained that providing a setback would reduce the unit count by 7 units. So frankly, I'm not fully persuaded that the project wouldn't be viable at 60 units, which is more than double the as-of right, and which reality was hinted at in conversations that we did have with HPD. Evidence of this perhaps in some way is Well Life's 58-unit building in the Bronx that received its final CO in 2017. However, for me, the real issue isn't about that setback from a street that's not open. The real issue, as I said, is that without ownership of 59th Street or agreement with DOT to allow its planting, the eastern side of the building will be too close to the property line to allow for any kind of buffering or landscaping. So if the applicant, that's the same thing that I was talking about before. The absence of any obstructions to their east should encourage very good growth of tall and bushy trees to soften the impact of the building. So for me, kind of the only way that I would be okay with not having a setback from the 59th Street is if there were landscaping as a commitment on the 59th Street tree, and ideally even in the road that should have been paved. That part they won't be able to commit to because you can't get DOT to agree to a planting in the roadbed. Or let's say you can't know whether DOT would agree to the planting in the roadbed, but the street trees is a standard. So if you could get DOT to not build a sidewalk, because I would think that was the other thing, why have a sidewalk that doesn't go anywhere? And so instead have that be all planted. So for me, an adequate buffer where the sidewalk is would go a long way to offsetting the absence of that setback from the required setback, yard setback. Anyway.
Should we continue? Okay. So, based on the revised drawings, these are my following comments. I believe the applicant has been responsive and has provided much wider buffer along the residential lot front, side lot, sorry. It has also reduced the height of the building and sets the building back from the street front and from the portion of the lot that is abutting residential homes. I think not having to demap or to acquire the 59th Street, given the timing and the need for affordable housing is critical, and we need to be mindful of. So in the absence, I'm okay with it being the way it is, and if a buffering is something that, as Chair recommended, is something that parks can do, would be fine. However, I think what abuts the 59th Street, the DMAP portion of 59th Street, is a cemetery, and it is not going to be built. So in terms of the buffering that we are proposing, it would be buffering against an open space that will remain open in perpetuity, at least 100 years. That's the life of the cemetery. And the applicant had listened to the concern we had raised at the last hearing, which is we had some concerns about habitable spaces fronting 59th Street at the street level and issue of privacy. The applicant has revised the plan by switching the habitable spaces along Cypress, which is set back quite a bit from Cypress, and providing office spaces along the DMAP portion of 59th. So the privacy issue of a residential, I think, has been addressed from my perspective. And in terms of the neighborhood character, the building is, as indicated in the plan. They have revised the plans, they've reduced the overall building height and the street wall height. Though the revised street wall height would,
Can we do something with the mic?
though the revised street wall height would be 7 foot above the permitted and the building height 7 foot above the permitted, it is not going to alter the character of the neighborhood for the following reasons. The height above the street wall is set back from Cypress Avenue and from abutting residential lots. Furthermore, it is buffered from the abutting residential uses by a 20-foot side yard, which, once landscape, as we are recommending, would make it visually not even, it would not be visible. Thus, the top floor is 33 feet away from the nearest residential building, if you count the 20-foot rear yard, so it would be 33 feet away from the nearest residential building. And the immediate residential buildings along Cypress Avenue and 59th are series of attached homes, 3 stories, including garages at street level, with a dwelling unit in the rear. So this is a typical quintessential Queens housing typology. You have a garage and you have 2 units above, and so the garage is at street grade. So these are 3 stories. So the height difference we are looking, even though residents and the community have said these are 2-story single-family homes, they're built to 3 stories high. So the height difference has to be measured from a 3-story to a 4-story with a setback on the 5th. Apart from that, the block front, both Cypress and 59th, contains a mix of 2- and 3-story homes with very few one-family and a lot of multifamily homes built in. Also, since Cypress Avenue bends away from the line of sight going southward, the subject site is less visible from the residential homes located to the north, which makes the presence of a 47-foot high building set away from the residents and from the Cypress Avenue even less impactful. So from my point of view, from my analysis, it meets the neighborhood character finding.
So I'm a bit confused. And I'm a bit confused because I thought it was the initiative of the chair to extend deference to apply to affordable housing, because affordable housing was considered a laudable goal that would benefit the city as a whole. So when I see the deference argument, to me, deference allows us to accept the programmatic needs as the determinant of the project scope. And so the programmatic needs suggested 66 units, and it was supported by fairly detailed financials talking about the viability of this project. In my mind, that's enough to satisfy the E finding. What would second guessing that do? It would extend the time, it's asking for information, and it's also superseding the programmatic needs and substituting it with a character finding, which is a finding in and of itself, the C finding. So what if they said they needed the 66 units, but in reality they only need 60 units? This is not a for-profit project, and the developer isn't going to go away to Hawaii with the difference in units, basically. What would happen is the 66 units might be more than what is ultimately determined to be the minimum, but that would end up serving the city's goal of providing affordable housing, and especially supportive affordable housing, which is the laudable goal. So if there's a slight overage, and I'm not entirely sure that there is an overage given what they gave us, I don't see that extending deference in this case wouldn't be appropriate. And deference is saying, well, their program details that they need 66 units, we're going to give them deference because it benefits the community to provide this.
Okay, so maybe you misunderstood what I said. So when we look, so this is a new type of variance, right? And when we look at programmatic needs of, say, a school, we have the School Construction Authority that has standards, and we're very experienced with looking at the schools, right? So we can understand when they have STEM and they need a laboratory and they need a music room and that kind of thing. We understand that, and we ask them, why do you have 4 music rooms? We ask them those questions, and then they explain why they have 4 music rooms, and either it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. Or why did you put the the gym on the ground floor? Why did you put the gym on the top floor? Why don't you put it on the ground floor? And the answer is something to do with the arrival of the students and this kind of thing, because sometimes gyms are on the ground floor and they insist it has to be on the ground floor because of the arrival. Let me finish. And so these are all informed both by our experience with looking at the schools, with architects who are explaining, or the school explaining how the school is operating, and school construction authority standards that help us understand that the gym has to be X size and a classroom has to be X size and all of that stuff. In this particular case, I was, and we've also had situations where we go to another agency and we say to the agency, look, they're asking for this thing. Can you help us understand whether that's the right thing, right? So nursery schools, for example, we always go to whatever it is, it's the school,
Construction authority?
Department of Health.
Yes.
Department of Health, and we say, here's a plan for the nursery school, for the pre-UPK. Is this okay because it doesn't have access to the outside, or the layout is X? So we get help from the other agencies. In this case, we are being asked to analyze the applicant's statement that they need this many units. And I was hoping that HPD would help us with that analysis, but HPD has declined to help us with the analysis. So if I were to take it an extreme and say the same exact applicant comes to us and says, we want to do 128 units, and they'll make an argument that 128 units is the minimum number of units necessary, so it's a 10-story building. So if we're looking at deference and programmatic needs and so on, there's a point at which you have to say, without more from an expert, as Commissioner Shetton mentioned before, without more from an expert who does this kind of work, it's very difficult for us to rely on the statement by the applicant, even though, you know, maybe it makes sense what they're saying, but we don't have anything to check it with from an expert in the field. So that's why I was saying, in this case, we look at neighborhood character, because unfortunately, we don't have the expertise of the agency that I was hoping would supply it. But what I said was, the only thing that the waiver that they're asking for that I have the most trouble with is the proximity to 59th Street. But 59th Street is an unopened street, right? And so if the street adjacent were something that was going to be developed, like, I don't know, is DOT eventually going, because they said they are willing to demap, but whoever takes it has to buy it, right? So it means that, for argument's sake, someone could take that little strip of land and build something on it. It's 60 feet wide or whatever it is, right? So it's wide enough to develop. So now you've got, well, that makes it a side lot line. So, but anyway, but the building is right up against that side lot line also. So that's my concern, is that without, and for the moment, let's just say, for argument's sake, it stays in this permanent location of never demapped, unless the cemetery purchases it, which would be a great idea, but unless they do, then the idea of creating a buffer zone that's planted is a way of compensating for the absence of a front yard or a side yard. So I'm not saying they have to, and where 60 units came up is simply that the architect said, I can't provide the side yard of 5 feet that he provided before, because if I do that, I have to reconfigure the whole building, I'll lose 7 units. Right? So, and I'm saying there's another solution that has to do with neighborhood character that allows those 7 units to remain. But at the same time, I'm voicing it that I'm not persuaded that, and there was a conversation with HPD where it was admitted that it's really impossible for them to tell whether 60 is viable versus 66 is viable. You could certainly do the difference between, say, 50 and 66. But when you get into those little dicing, you can't do it unless you're doing a real feasibility analysis today based on funding structure today, which they weren't willing to do.
I agree, which is why, to me, when you say extending deference, and I just wanted to point out that similarly in a school, when you talk about why a gym has to be located on the first floor, ultimately, we defer to their program. Ultimately,
Right.
what they tell us is the gym has to be on the first floor because it's ease of entry and exit, or the gym has to be on the top floor. We usually defer to their program. And so in this case, we're supposed to be extending deference, as per your instruction, yet we're questioning the program. We're questioning it even though they're giving us their expert opinion in financials that are, yes, they're schematic financials, because ultimately we're not going to know the funding structure until the day of, which is why HPD doesn't want to opine, which I don't blame them. But I don't understand why we're not then giving them the same deference if this is a deference case. That's my only question.
Okay.
And then let the C finding be met on the C finding basis, and then all of those comments about the buffer and all of that be part of the C finding versus the E finding.
Yeah. I'm not saying that we're shifting, moving findings around. I'm just saying that, again, with the gym, if a school came to us and they said they needed a 120-foot-long gym, we'd say, no, school construction standards say a gym has to be 85 feet long, right? So at least we have something to be able to push back with. And we have had situations, for instance, with schools where they say, oh, we need an office for the president, the vice president, the secretary, the treasurer, and all this sort of stuff. And they have so many gigantic administrative offices. And we say, we appreciate that you have a programmatic requirement for offices for these administrators. They can share a room. They can have smaller offices. And that's where we push back on the schools, for example. So it's not that we don't push back on schools, on houses of worship. We don't specifically, we don't just say, you told us that you need to have a banquet facility, right? Or you told us that you need to have 3 rooms that are multi-purpose rooms for your house of worship. And we say, actually, 2 is enough because it's making the building too tall, right? So the programmatic requirements and the neighborhood character are always played against each other, and in this situation, without having the benefit of guidance from an expert, we don't have anything to play off of it. And what I'm trying to make clear here is that we can't just accept the simple unchecked statement of the applicant in terms of programmatic requirements. We never do on those other cases. On those other cases, we often say, gym's too big, whatever, we don't say gym's too big, but we say you have too many of these things, or move this down into the cellar, or dig deeper, or you have to get rid of that. We have done that. In one case, we had kindergarten through high school, and we said, there's too much in this building. You have to get rid of one of these programs, and so they got rid of the high school.
Right, but we've always accepted for affordable housing, in being that it's not a for-profit project, we have always accepted from them, support your programmatic needs with a financial that shows that the funding requires that you have a certain number of units minimal. So that's
But that
what's
was
always
50
historically been accepted on all of the affordable housing projects. So to me, to give deference and then insist on an even higher standard kind of is in conflict with the whole idea of the deference, because now it's making it even more difficult to make that finding, which basically was a very straightforward finding. Because this wasn't a for-profit project, it was show us your programmatic needs and give us a schematic financial that shows that you've taken into account unit number and the impact on the finances of the project and whether or not the project could be built. It was a simple kind of schematic. And the big picture was, show us at which point it stops being a project that can't be built and starts being a project that looks attractive to funders. And that's basically what they gave us. And so to me, to give them deference is to say, okay, we're not going to second guess you and insinuate that what you're giving us is in fact a falsehood. And so that's why I'm confused here. But, I guess you made your comments, I've made mine, and that's
Right,
it.
but I just want to be very clear, because I don't want to, I'm concerned also we'll see an application for 80 units, 20 units.
Right.
And we won't be able to, and what you're saying is, we'll have to take them at their
Ultimately,
word.
that's what we do. We ask questions.
Yes,
But
so-
we have no choice. That's what you do at this level of government. You have to independently analyze the situation and use your judgment and make a judgment call. And ultimately, if they're lying to us and we
No, it's
really
not
only
all-
needed 60 units, ha ha ha, shame on them for lying to us. But there's going to be no way we could prove that unless we're sitting at the closing when this building is finally closing and they finally settle on the number of apartments.
Well, actually, no, we could also do this in another way, but, which is what we've been discussing with HPD. You don't need to wait until the date of the closing. You can just, all the financials that you look at when we're looking at for-profits are snapshots in time. You don't know that by the time that project finally has its shovel in the ground, any of those funding sources are available, that interest rates are going to be what they are, that banks are out of the story, which is what happened, right? There was a period where banks left and the new model was investors, right? You couldn't predict that that was what was going to happen. So instead you look at a snapshot on the day of the financial analysis and you say, if I were building it right now under the current circumstances, this is what it would be. And what I wish that HPD would do is do the same, a snapshot. If we were to fund today under current funding programs, this is what we would fund, this is how it would look, this is what we would approve, and so on. And we're still not there with HPD doing it. A snapshot is doable.
Right, but it isn't their mandate to do our job for us. So they have a larger mandate to provide certain thousands of numbers.
I want to cut this off now. We rely on agencies all over the city to help us come to a decision. It's not their mandate to help us either, and I just don't want to continue with this. Okay, so let's
Can I just
move on.
add one item? On a letter dated April 15, 2019, HPD did provide a letter regarding the application, and they did indicate that while the letter is not binding commitment, neither the city nor HPD shall have an obligation to make a loan. I mean, this is a standard statement that I have in my years of experience at HPD. I've seen these letters being sent where we stand committed to a project, yet we do not show our anything that is binding. And this is the extent of the letter of commitment that HPD has so far in my 10 years of work with HPD has provided, which always shows that there's a commitment to work with the applicant to provide the funding. And that is the letter also to a large extent will also help them in applying for the 9% tax credit. So it's not that they're looking at a financial term sheet that is completely signed and sealed. That 9% tax credit is even more serious deal than what they're here before us. So for the 9% tax credit for any of the application, it's one of these soft commitment letters, as it's called at HPD. It's provided for the applicant to proceed with all the applications with all the financial sources. And yes, you're absolutely right, it's a snapshot in time, but HPD, until and unless the last day of closing, the interest rates and finances are in place, that's the number that they will go by. And I have seen projects where till the last day, the unit numbers are changing. So, I think this is the extent of the letter of commitment that we can get from HPD, and this is consistent with the previous application that we had with the that we did with Catholic Charity, I believe.
Yes.
And it's a similar, so, and also in terms of the term sheet that they have provided, it's also the way they have analyzed it is very similar to the term sheet that was used for the analysis for the Catholic Charity in terms of the breakdown. So not being a financial expert, but just looking at what has been approved and reviewed for Catholic Charity and what is here before us, it's very similar, so I don't think they have analyzed it in a way that's going to give them a windfall. It is what minimally HPD requires and reviews.
I thought that the chair said that when speaking to HPD, they stated that they would fund with less units.
No, what they said, what they said was they can't, wouldn't be able to tell whether a 60-unit versus a 66-unit is a viable project. It's too close, those numbers are too close together. Whereas doing something like 50 versus 66, they could do.
So-
That's pretty obvious. 50 versus 66 is a big leap, right? But, not that they analyzed it, but what they indicated was even if they were to help us with this, they wouldn't be able to fine tune it like that. And so that's kind of a big issue going forward when you are pushing back on the building being too big. I mean, for instance, you do this neighborhood character finding and you say the building's too big, right? You have to lose 20 units. And their answer would be, oh, but the only thing that's viable is this many units, not talking about this project, but right? So,
In my opinion, then maybe that development isn't right for that neighborhood.
right, so then that's neighborhood character pushing against the minimum variance that is claimed to be needed. If you came to a project that said it has to be 80 units in the same exact location, and you say, my God, it's 4 stories taller than it should be, there needs to be, and then the response is, we don't have a viable project unless we have those extra 20 units, then the answer has to be, then this isn't the site for you because we can't give deference to the point where it overwhelms the character.
It's
right?
more than just a general
Right.
concern about neighborhoods.
And that's why I say that whenever we look at these deference cases, it's a give and take between the program that they say they need and the fact that the building has to fit within the neighborhood, and you can't deny those things, and we have removed program in many cases where the building was too big, out of character, whatever. But okay, I think we've discussed it.
Item number 20, may I go on? Item number 22, 2018-171BZ, 1 East 70th Street, Manhattan.
This is being adjourned.
New cases, item number 1, 2019-58BZ, 13335 79th Street, Queens.
We have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends conditional approval stating that they would prefer the special permit to be operator-specific. The maximum term is 3 years on this, so it's pretty operator-specific. The owner has consented to this application by the operator, which is a finding of the special permit. The drawings and the CCD1 indicate maximum occupancy of the space is 456 persons. I'd like to understand, does this include as simultaneous occupancy? The 156 persons in the mezzanine, I don't really understand how that is it by floor or by the whole building? So, because the first floor has 456 and the second floor has 156 persons. The mezzanine is described as being the required waiting area under the special permit. The statement of facts doesn't explain how this would function and how it would meet the findings. I'd like them to explain that. And also, what about ADA accommodation for the waiting area? There's no way to get to that mezzanine by, if you're in a wheelchair or otherwise unable to climb stairs. The land use map shows the development includes residential uses. Is that correct? It's kind of confusing because it looks like it's a shopping center, but meanwhile the land use map seems to show there are mixed-use buildings on the site. And they need to show the front door on the site plan A0.1. Don't know how you get into this building from from where you get into the building. Anybody else?
So the question you had regarding ADA to mezzanine, like we do in PCE, if they are providing the same function on the ground floor,
It's a waiting room. Right?
oh, it's,
It's required waiting.
okay.
It's part of the findings. So they're required to have a separate waiting area so that people don't line up on the street and block the front door.
I thought they
egress.
also have a little bit on the ground floor.
So that's what I want them to explain. I don't see where the disabled waiting is, and disabled climbing stairs, that could just be an elderly person. You're not talking about wheelchairs anymore, right? Okay. Anybody else?
Item number 2, 2017-261BZ, 527 East New York Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. We have proof of service to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Yeah, this was postponed the last time. We need a new authorization. I don't know if we got that from the applicant who moved to another law firm.
I've not seen it, but I did inform the applicant that it's required.
Okay, so we don't have authorization to proceed in this hearing without owner's authorization that this applicant can represent the owner, right? Community Board and Borough President recommended approval. We have 1 letter in support and 2 letters of objection, citing concerns about traffic, noise, loss of light and air. With respect to the as-of-right depth of the portion of the building on a shallow interior lot, it is, the shallow interior lot is, 40, not 20. So the depth of the building can be much deeper because this is a shallow lot and you only need a 10-foot rear yard in that little portion. So really, it's mostly lot coverage that's limiting the building size, not the rear yard requirement. The program, so they should amend their as-of-right drawing, is not correct. The program reads most closely to a community center or settlement house above a synagogue, especially the GED type classes and the music studio. I'd like to know whether the activities are integrated, and if they could, like we get on some of these, explain a typical day for a typical participant. That would maybe inform better how all of these spaces are being used. They should discuss, and I think the issue here is this is a kind of an after-school program working under initially a house of worship deference case, but actually perhaps they could be working on the shallow lot version, and that might make it easier for them in case there is an issue about it being more like a community house as opposed to a religious institution. It seems like there are religious classes being offered, but there's also, they have a recording studio, for example, and they have computer rooms and things like that. So it's obviously a program for supplemental education, post-graduation, post-high school graduation, which isn't really a house of worship kind of approach. Or maybe it is, they need to explain that to us. I know there was case law cited to where the courts have held that religious institutions can provide other services to the community, but this is sounding more like a community center than a synagogue. So I'd like them to talk about that more or rely more on the size of the site. They also should discuss, which they didn't, the impact of the rear yard and lot coverage encroachment on adjoining properties. There are a lot of entry doors to the building, so it seems very free-flowing. I'd like to understand whether there's any security or reception. There's no reception shown. Normally with a synagogue, you don't have security, but since the rest of the building is being used for these other purposes, I'm curious how you control who comes, if that's the goal. They also need to show trash storage on the interior of the building, and And if meals are served, which the website indicates they are, they need refrigerated trash storage. Website indicates that there's like weekly dinners, gathering kind of dinners. Also, I'd like to know whether, it looks like the roof will be used. The elevator stops there, so it's a source of noise. If it's going to be used, then it needs to be limited, as we do with no lighting and no amplification of sound. But that it means they need to go through, the noise analysis didn't look at the roof being occupied. There are balconies at the front, which I can't really tell how deep they are. They're not dimensioned. They look like they're about 18 inches. I don't know what they're there for, other than potentially also a noise source. So that should be explained. And they need to provide side elevations, treat the building as a 360-degree structure, which is what a building is. It will be visible on about 3 1/4 sides. And I note that ephes, which is shown on the drawings, is not permitted. It needs to change to a durable material. Any other comments?
I had a question regarding the programmatic need. I would like the applicant to provide more details on the occupancy, especially the simultaneous occupancy of spaces. I was specifically trying to understand the programmatic need chart where it talks about the Torah room, which will be used when the classes are not in session. And the classes are going to be in session therefore afterwards. So why can't the Torah room be used as classroom unless there is an issue of secularism, and so that needs to be clearly stated. And because of that, then the Torah room has to be kept separate from the other classrooms. I do see the hardship here, this rather shallow lot, 50 foot wide, and trying to accommodate all the need.
50 feet.
Sorry, 50 feet deep, 50 feet deep. The other question I had was if they can provide a plan that delineates the corner lot and the interior lot. I do have concern about the rooftop use. I think in a lot of other similar type of uses, we have, this reminds me of place of worship in the Bronx, which was, though abutting a lot of industrial uses, we had asked them to not allow the elevator to stop on the rooftop and also not have balconies and rooftop be accessible. I think given the proximity of this site to all residential buildings, and most of these are apartment buildings, I would be more inclined to not allow for any rooftop access.
So in those other cases where we've said the elevator can't stop at the roof, it's because the noise studies indicated that there were sensitive receptors that were not going to be mitigated by any kind of buffering, right, sound buffering. So then we said, no, either you do that, which would be expensive, or you don't have it. So we don't know now whether there is receptors, because there's been no study.
Yeah, there definitely are. I mean, right across within 100 feet, there is an apartment building which overlooks the rear yard, and it is just with, I think, spacing of 20 feet or something like that. And there's a couple of other residential buildings across the street and along that block front. So definitely then there are sensitive noise receptors along that block. So the applicant should be very much aware of that and be prepared to address it one way or the other.
Right. Okay. Anybody else?
Item number 3, 2019 40BZ, 175-179 East 73rd Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval. We have one letter of objection concerned about additional pedestrian and vehicular traffic. I'd like somebody to explain to me what a day shul is as opposed to the main sanctuary, since that adds program space. Also, is the roof proposed to be used? Similar question to before. The EAS, I don't think, studied the impacts of a used roof, and it's got an elevator to it. And I just wanted to observe, having been on the Landmarks Commission, it's a big statement about how buildings were designed in the early 20th century. That a garage building, built for a garage building, could offer a grand and elegant home for a synagogue. I wish the architects of today would take note of that. Your building can last for hundreds of years and be constantly repurposed. They do need a refrigerated trash storage area because there will be meals made here. I didn't find in the materials the Landmarks certificate of appropriateness. There was a lot of discussion about how many times I went to Landmarks and all of that, but I didn't see the C of A. I didn't find also DOT sign-off of the EAS. DEP has a June 6th letter that requires a phase 2.5. And DEP on July 16th had comments on air quality.
Which the applicant addressed.
Right, but we didn't get DEP's sign off.
Right.
In terms of impact on available parking by the conversion of the garage to this use, which is discussed in the materials, the impact is described as a 4-space shortfall. I'd like to understand whether that's the result of the delta between the 311 as-of-right seats and the 432 proposed seats, or merely the result of converting a parking garage to another use, because what I didn't check in the EAS is whether the no-build is a synagogue, just with fewer seats, or it's a garage. So, because it should be a synagogue, that's what we do with not-for-profits. We don't assume that it wouldn't be built because it's not a for-profit. A for-profit, you would make no reasonable return if you built the as-of-right building. In this case, you would build a synagogue, arguably, just with fewer seats. And again, there's no parking requirement for this use in the Manhattan core, so it's not as if zoning, they're asking for a parking waiver. Anybody else?
With regards to the rooftop, yes, the application does talk about the rooftop being used for religious programs and other cultural, and there are 2 rooftops, one of the garage and the other building, so both seem to be accessible.
One is for mechanical, the small building is a mechanical roof.
There is a door, and there seems to be an area one could walk through, so I do have a question on that. So I would put a question on both of them and get clarification from DEP with regards to the noise sign-off. With the parking, I actually thought it was interesting, given the as-of-right use can be a residential and a community facility use, and as you mentioned, the zoning does not require parking for any of the uses here. So the parking study was kind of interesting to read just for facts to me.
For facts about the community, for facts about, sorry, I didn't understand.
For facts, I mean, even if it was to be converted to an as-of-right community facility use, parking would not be required.
Right.
So what the application is here before us is not for the parking waiver, as you pointed out. It's
Right.
really for the...
But an EAS looks at impacts and
Right.
says that the impacts are below the threshold and so on, but just to clarify, what I just don't understand is whether that shortfall is simply by converting the building to another use, therefore you lose all those parking spaces, or because there's something about the demand for the synagogue that creates that shortfall. Because, because we know there's no parking available on the street in Manhattan, so.
I did have one question as to why 2 elevator banks were being required, not being proposed.
2 elevator.
Why 2 elevator banks were being proposed? Why not 1? And would that minimize a little bit of the rear yard encroachment? That's a question, more of a theoretical question I have for the applicant to answer tomorrow.
Okay, anybody else?
I'd like some explanation as to the number of congregants and how they got there. There seems to be a bit of back and forth on that, and I just want to ask to have them clarify that, how they reach that number of congregants, if they're double counting or not.
If they're double counting?
there was two petitions, two online petitions on this.
Uh-huh.
And I wonder if there's different names, because they didn't seem like they have a lot of evidence on each one. So I want to get a bit more information on how they arrived at that number. Are these people actually verified people, or?
Well, they have real addresses, and they redacted the
So not all of
names,
them.
right?
Not all of them have real addresses. Then at some points it says that these are families, and at other points they call them individuals. I just want them to get into that for me.
Okay. Okay.
Is that it?
Yes.
This concludes the public review session for July 22nd, 2019.